So I'm just to say, I'm super excited about your presentation, Greg. You've always given the most rich, detailed analysis because for people who aren't aware, this is one of the largest end-use monitoring research that's ever been done in our country. It's at a ridiculously rigorous accuracy, but it's also just the fact that we have a couple hundred apartments that we're studying, which is, you know, like an order of magnitude more than usually a study of this quality gets done at. You often see like 15 homes or 20 homes, not 200 apartments. So that's cool. We're thumbing up on transferring it over yet?
Mhm.
Okay, so what do we need to do next?
Mhm.
Nothing? Okay, so, oh, there you go. I'm gonna mute myself. Greg is a brilliant researcher, works at Build It Green. Love him to bits. Here you go, Greg, it's all you.
Thanks, John. Can everybody hear me okay? I want to do a sound check first to make sure that my audio is good on my side.
Things are perfect.
Awesome. Okay, so yeah, so today we're going to talk about what Sean just mentioned, which is ZNE homes, multifamily homes, in what I guess is one of the larger to-date data sets in terms of just quantity and of total data points. So Sean introduced me a little bit, but I'll just kind of give a little bit more background. My name is Greg Pfotenhauer. I graduated Humboldt State in 2015. Environmental engineering was my BS there. And I've also got some background in data science, which is kind of how I ended up in this realm. After graduating, spent a year or two at Schatz Energy Research Center doing work on biomass and as well as some solar, off-grid solar projects. I've been working with Sean at Redwood Energy since about 2014 to 2016, and then kind of onward on some of these ongoing grants. And now for the last 2 years, almost to the date, I've been working at Build It Green, continuing this work that we'll be talking about today. So a little bit of outline, talk about the project background. Since it's kind of a big project, I think it deserves an introduction. I'm going to go into an energy end-use breakdown for one of our sites. I'm going to kind of focus on one of the four. Then I'll talk about demand and then kind of delve into carbon, at least preliminarily. And I will note that up front, you know, we're still in the process of collecting data. We're about, let's see, 2 years into this 3.5-year grant. Is that right? And we've still got, you know, many terabytes worth of data to harvest. So these data I'll be presenting today are all very preliminary. So this project, this greater project, is the EPIC grant GFO 15-308. It's focused on multifamily ZNE. The main goals of the project are to demonstrate the technical and economic potential for optimized all-electric ZNE multifamily new construction practices through 4 demonstration projects to inform best practices and codes and standards. Secondly, to communicate lessons learned in a way that facilitates broader adoption of ZNE practices with reduced performance risk. And that's pretty broad and a little bit vague. But some of the research questions that we're going to be tackling in this 4-year study are, you know, some of the differences, benefits and drawbacks of central versus individual all-electric systems for both domestic hot water and HVAC. Combined versus separate. So we have a couple of 4-pipe systems, electric 4 pipes that I'll talk about briefly. Electric versus natural gas heating and domestic hot water, the potential for thermal storage and load shifting via thermal storage means, plumbing optimization, and then my piece of it, which is energy efficiency via on-site renewable investment and end use, characterizing you know, how people use energy in a multifamily setting. So the 4 sites that I mentioned are kind of spread out throughout the state, although it's hard to get, you know, a complete picture without getting, you know, every single climate zone. We've got 2 in climate zone 4. Those are Sunnyvale and Tascadero. It looks like a Tascadero might be a little bit off there, but it's close. And Calistoga and Cloverdale, which are in Napa and Sonoma Valley, respectively, in climate zone 2. So we've installed at Tascadero, Cloverdale, and Calistoga. And I'll talk a little bit about the monitoring plan for that. And then actually, we've started installation at Sunnyvale, and we'll be continuing actually this week. For each one, at least for the electrical end use monitoring piece of it, we've got 5 to 10 end uses monitored per site. So that includes the mains for each apartment, as well as 3 to 8 lines per each apartment. So cooking, domestic hot water, HVAC, plug loads, etc. It's second by second data. We're collecting voltage, current, and phase angle. And so in all, it ends up being, in the order of, the tens of billions of data points. So it's a lot of data. In addition to kind of just sort of characterizing, the energy and demand of these systems, we're doing a little bit of behavioral studying. So part of the installation involves a Canary instrument, which is a device that basically gives tenants feedback in real time on how their energy and power, or their instantaneous and daily, if you prefer to put it that way, is going. And it's based on just a very simple green to red RGB color scheme, without having to know anything about what a kilowatt hour is or any of that nonsense. And the main goal of this project is to kind of get an idea of, since we do have such a large data set, what is the utility of something like this in an all-electric setting? Do people actually respond to these types of behavioral nudges? Because while you can find evidence, or lots of companies out there that will claim that they can do it, a lot of times it's not quite that simple. So that's the second piece of this sub-piece of the grant. Some pictures of the locations we're studying. 2 of them are renderings. I apologize for that. Like I said, we're monitoring 5 to 10 end uses per site. At Calistoga, Cloverdale, and Sunnyvale, it's pretty straightforward. Calistoga and Cloverdale are both central systems, so we don't have as much to monitor on the tenant side. Sunnyvale is a central domestic hot water, but unitary HVAC, so also a fewer lines. Tascadero is all unitary. So we kind of had to split everything up into 3 subgroups so that we could capture all the loads. There's about, 16 circuits, active circuits per apartment, so it ends up being a lot. Right on the left there, you can see just that's in the panel. The little blue things are the CTs we've got clamped onto each line. So I'm going to just, for comparison's sake, show you a couple slides here on all of these apartment complexes, and then kind of move on to Tascadero, since that's kind of the most interesting from my point of view. This is daily cooking energy at all complexes. It's not insignificant. If I didn't mention it previously, these are all, at least these 3 are low-income farm worker housing. So demographically, kind of dissimilar from, maybe other populations in California, which is good from the standpoint of we have very, normalized kind of population, but also, can't make broad generalizations about, other populations, given that they are a very specific group of people. But even across climate zones, even there's a lot of, variation across different families with different behaviors. As far as cooking habits go, the law of large numbers still applies. People tend to sort of congregate around a normal. So you can see there's a fairly linear relationship between overall energy use for cooking as it scales with occupancy. Same with plug loads, although plug loads is something I'll talk a little bit about because, as we've been talking about today, there's just so much stuff we're adding to the grid mix that is just making it a total mess from both an energy and demand standpoint. But still a fair amount of consistency, at least in terms of magnitude, among the three sites here.
Well, and it seems like orange and green, Calistoga and Cloverdale are almost the same. I mean, that's so close. So,
yeah, it's kind of funny. It's the overall averages sort of obfuscate the spread, and I don't have a bar chart of the plug loads for these sites on me today, but yeah, there are all kinds of crazy stuff. If you start digging into the data, for anybody who's looked at any population, any residential population, you start seeing all kinds of weird stuff. But when you have enough, when you have a big enough sample, people do start to look alike. So let's talk about Tascadero. This is the third of the four sites that we've installed at. This one to me is the most interesting because it's all unitary, so it's all contained within the apartment, and it was the first site where we monitored 10 lines, so we kind of got the whole picture. As far as just overall energy use is concerned, there's 2, 3, and 4 bedroom at Tascadero. 17 to 23 kilowatt hours on average per day. This is from July through December. So, about a half a year, so relatively representative of a whole year. Like I said, you can see the spread from the top to bottom user. This is the average for all days. So, you've got people who are using an average of 10 kilowatt hours a day, and you've got people who are using, more than 30. And even though they've got the same appliances, the same, heating and cooling loads, theoretically, same everything else, this is all behaviorally driven, order of 3 from the lowest to the highest user. As far as the year is concerned, this is just daily kilowatt hours for a 3-bedroom. As expected, kind of follows the highs and the lows for temperature. You can see as we're heading into January, this more recent cold we had in early January, late December, I guess. I wasn't here to experience it, but that's really starting to drive things up. I'm not going to talk in depth about any specific loads that might be contributing to that, but just to sort of say, basically, domestic hot water load has increased substantially. These are heat pump domestic hot water heaters, so the resistance elements are definitely kicking on. There's a huge opportunity for capturing some of that and doing some thermal load shifting. But as the water gets colder and your deltas get bigger, you're going to see these types of spikes, and not only in energy, but in demand as well, like we were talking about with the last presentation. These needle peaks when we've got heat pumps kicking on at the same time, and you might have 30 kilowatts or something per apartment. As far as this breaks down across all circuits, now this isn't aggregated into total plug loads or anything like that. This is just at the circuit level. So these smaller percentages aren't too important, but you can see there's a lot going on here. Specific to this population, I don't know if you can see it, but the dishwasher is that about 0.1%. So nobody's using their dishwasher here. Saw a lot of people on site using it as storage, not as an actual dishwasher. So things like this are sort of indicative of cultural norms and really vary from population to population. About a quarter of the energy, at least at this is more or less representative of a 3-bedroom apartment. It's going to domestic hot water, and another quarter going to heating and cooling. Third of it or more is all plug loads, which is fairly surprising given that this is low income and these aren't very large. I think the 4 bedrooms are just over 1,100 square feet. There's not a lot of room to plug in stuff, but we're seeing people cram more and more stuff into their houses as with every year. As far as this breaks down in demand, pretty typical shape. You might notice this early morning 4 a.m. peak that's cooking. This is, again, farm worker housing, so people are getting up at maybe 3 a.m. cooking and then getting on a bus or driving to work. So this little bump isn't really typical of most populations, but it is pretty consistent here. Peak is around 4 p.m. at least from June to August, which makes sense. That's largely driven by the condensing unit. But also, there's a lot of cooking starting to happen right about that time. And then later on in the evening, as we start using up our stored thermal energy in our domestic hot water heater, we get a late evening peak. This is even more pronounced in the winter. So this is November to January, and our peak, we kind of have a double peak going on. I'm not really sure what happened here, but it looks like our population kind of split. I'm not sure if it was after harvest season and some people started sleeping in, but we've got a cooking and domestic hot water peak, 2 of them in the morning, and then 2 kind of in the evening. We've shifted later and with more of with domestic hot water driving that peak more, obviously, as we've got that bigger delta and the heat pump having a harder time keeping up with the demand. Heating loads, we're only into January, nothing too crazy yet, but as we collect more data, I'm sure we'll see the condensing unit contributing more to this peak,
Okay.
especially later.
Greg,
Yeah.
could you go to the previous slide and show us, because it does look like the compressor unit, or the condensing unit, the HVAC, the compressor outside, that it's using less in the winter than in the summer. Is that correct?
At least for this 3-month, period. That's correct.
Okay, so this is mostly air, yeah, it's air conditioning driven, and here we're seeing heating being relatively small. Okay, that's cool. Thank you.
One thing you might notice too, and I'm not going to talk a lot about it because we don't really have a ton of information yet, but there's this huge baseload, air conditioning baseload. Most people don't use their thermostats like they should. It's kind of just an on-off switch. It's not programmed. We've got a huge baseload here that sort of we haven't determined what it is yet, but it's the order of a couple hundred watts continuous. Which is not nothing, across 60 apartments. So
yeah, and I mean, I'm just noting that the King City analysis that you did the same way a few years ago showed much less HVAC load in the exact same climate zone. King City's not that far from a Tascadero, but this heating and cooling load is way bigger than what we saw over there. So yeah, you might be onto something. There might be something funky with this 200 watt just standard load. What's up?
yeah, and it'll be interesting as we collect more data. Sunnyvale is technically climate zone 4, but it's right on the tip, almost, basically San Jose. Tascadero is pretty far south, and if you've ever been down there, it gets hot. There's a fair amount of diversity in climate zone 4. It's a pretty long climate zone. So and I'll talk about this more in a little bit, but the models definitely underestimate how much cooling load will be here, even in a typical year, not an abnormal year like maybe 2016, I think was record heat year. All right, so as far as ZNE is concerned, because that's really all why we're here, right? Broken down, we're also collecting solar data, at least on a daily basis right now. We'll get higher resolution later, but I've broken that out into an estimate of what a daily load shape, or sorry, a daily production curve would look like based on the daily GHI for a Tascadero. These are all pretty much flat or maybe 5-degree collectors, so there's not a ton of variation or really weird stuff going on. Not a lot of shading. Most of it's rooftop. So the only thing that really changes is the amount of sun available in a given day, and you can see how that affects overall production in the figure on the right. We've got 81.5% of this devoted towards residential, and the remaining 18.5% common area. A little more digging to do on this, but we should have hit about 200,000 kilowatt hours for the 7 months, June through December. And according to the bills, we're only at about 113,000. So significant underproduction, and not really sure what's going on there, but we'll find out more, I'm sure. Let's just revisit our demand pattern again. I may have shown this earlier, maybe not. As far as the residential units are concerned, we'll ignore the common area for now. We've got an earlier peak in the summer, a later peak in the winter. And you can see how that kind of changes through the shoulder season, with the peak really not non-existent, but much smaller in September and October. We translate that into net energy or net demand. We get our nice little, at least top of the duck. And during the hours of 8 to about 2 p.m., at least in the shoulder and summer months currently, we are going negative, so we're exporting energy to the grid. November, December, we're never getting that far. Not enough sun to do it, and an underperforming PV array, it seems like. So still have a lot of energy there. You can see on the right side that we're not making up for. As far as how that translates into percent, that we're offsetting with our solar, I don't think there are any days. Nope, there are no days where we are actually producing more than we've consumed, which is unfortunate. And as we're going to the winter, things are only getting worse, although there's a few outliers, a few good days in there. On average, I think, I don't know if I put it here, think we're offsetting only about 50%. As far as why this is, I already mentioned, we may have an underperforming solar array or something going on there. I'll have to look into that more. But also, the solar array doesn't seem to have been sized for the load that we're actually seeing. I already mentioned that cooling was way underpredicted. You can see the HVAC load. I believe this is just June through December. So this is about half a year's worth of modeling on the left and the actual consumption on the right. We pretty much blew that out of the water by a factor of 3 just for the condensing unit. Domestic hot water is more or less spot on. You can see the 4-bedroom. There's still some optimization to be done there. Resistance element kicking on more than it probably should. Worth noting that these units were in high demand mode, or at least some of them were when they were installed. So, this is kind of skewed by the fact that these water heaters aren't maybe running as efficiently as they could be. Cooking, more or less spot on. We tend to see a lot higher cooking loads in these types of populations. A lot of people, when we visited their apartments, they would have beans on warm all day, which is typical in a lot of Hispanic households for any of you out there. And then, like I said, plug loads are all over the place. We've got our biggest plug loads in our 2 bedrooms. And as we're kind of going through different apartments and seeing, what people are plugging into their homes, since everybody has, a different load profile, seeing all kinds of stuff from secondary refrigerators to ice coolers, really inefficient ice coolers like the ones you see in gas stations, plug-in wheelchairs, which may not be a very significant load, but, add to base load, plugged in all night. People with fish tanks, people with water coolers, which tend to not have the most efficient refrigeration compressors. So all kinds of weird stuff adding to this noise, and something that's really hard to pin down and is kind of a constantly moving target. As far as carbon is concerned, this is the average daily grid mix for 2013. I just wanted to show this because it's a nice graph from CAISO that shows the average breakdown, at least, of our grid mix. But we're not really concerned with that because obviously the marginal emissions change on the hour, on the day. So for this accounting, we're going to go with a marginal emissions factor to try to kind of quantify what the impact of this particular complex is. This is pulled from E3's avoided cost calculator, which relies on long-run marginal emissions. As expected, you can see in June here, which is this blue line in the bottom, there's frequent curtailment going on. So a lot of times our carbon intensity in the grid for a couple hours may be 0. The average for the month of June is pretty low, especially at the hours of 9 to 11. Other months, not quite there yet, but as we progress into the future, we're going to start seeing this dip lower and lower for even the shoulder months as we exceed our consumption in the middle of the day. Revisiting our demand pattern again, just for context. If we add those two together, we get a gross carbon impact in terms of kilograms of CO2 for Tascadero. Note that we're never really hitting 0 because we aren't producing as much as we'd like to be, but it's definitely, at least reducing our baseline in the middle of the day. And I should note this is on a per. This is for all units, all 60 units at Tascadero. As far as kilograms net carbon. We are going negative and exporting, or reducing some carbon from the grid in the middle of the day. We're adding to that solar peak, at least during the months of June, July, August, September. But what's really important is, how much of that is actually useful, avoided, emissions, and how much of it is just adding to the already curtailed solar. As far as how it breaks down for end uses, our biggest contributors are our biggest loads, obviously. That's driven more by how much they coincide with our peak, which is when our dirtiest energy is. For the most part, because all of our main peaks sort of followed that curve, but also had a large enough base load, just due to the amount of variation in this population. We don't see anything too crazy in terms of really, really dirty end uses. Although cooking, because it coincides with the dirtiest time of day, at least for this apartment complex, is the most quote dirty of the end uses as far as how much carbon it's inflicting. So this represents a missed opportunity. We're generating at the times of day we don't want to. The duck curve we've been talking about for years now doesn't match the peak well, and there's all this curtailment going on anyways. So any extra solar we're exporting to the grid doesn't really have much to do with it anyways, and that's only going to get worse as we.
Oh, you died out there. Oh, Greg, you're getting a little blurry. Speak here.
Uh-oh.
Oh, and you're at your 1 or 2 minute warning, just so you know.
Perfect timing. So just to repeat that slide, like I said, we're generating at the wrong times of day. We're not matching our peak well, and we're already, we're already curtailing. So any solar that we are exporting to the grid during those times of day isn't really going anywhere, or we're paying to get rid of it essentially. So is there an opportunity for load shifting? This could be batteries or it could be thermal storage, like is the point of, or one of the points of our study. Thermal storage is easy if you already have a battery and the controls, and you don't have externalities like lithium mining and that kind of thing. But it's a little bit more nuanced than just charging a battery and discharging. So we're a little bit capped in terms of how much we can do there. I ran sort of a basic scenario in terms of, at least for 2018, how much more we could offset if we had a battery bank. And the answer is probably not a lot, although we could at least increase it by maybe 20,000 kilograms, assuming that that actually reduces the overall production in the grid, which is a little bit of a big assumption to make. So there's a lot of potential here, at least for moving into the future and trying to make our solar do more for us. But we don't have the infrastructure in place to do it, at least not to capture all of that. Hopefully at the next time we present, we'll be able to present on the opportunity for thermal load shifting. So charging our domestic hot water heaters at 2 p.m. and waiting until 10 p.m. to charge them again after they've been used up. But we don't have those data quite yet. And just to kind of show you where we're headed to 2048, at least the next 30 years, this is how the marginal emission rate is going to change. So ducks everywhere. We're only deepening the duck in the middle of the day. And we're going to have to address this, as we've been talking about. We are way behind on storage. So hopefully this was enlightening, and I look forward to presenting 6 months.
Yay! Great job, Greg. Great job. And I thought your presentation is excellent in part because it ties closely to what Martha was showing us earlier, as well as Ram. And if you didn't know that Ram Ramamurthy is also the patent holder for the Ice Bear, which is ice storage. And I was just seeing that your CO2 impacts domestic hot water, which we're responsible for trying to offset those loads. But yeah, that one. Domestic hot water is big in red, and then that compressor and the condensing unit in blue. It seems like the worst of it's in July, right? In August, those are the 2 months when if we had ice storage, we could really do something about decarbonizing, or if we had electrochemical storage, but storage is what we need there, it seems. Okay, and this, by the way, does reinforce what Martha was saying earlier about the criticalness of shell efficiency. These buildings are already super efficient on the shell. They're inspected for QII and etc. But okay. Any last comments you want to make, Greg, before we transfer over to our next presenter?
I think that does it.
All right. Yay. Thank you, Greg. That was just fascinating. Super cool. So we're moving over now to Sean Oram. And Sean is an engineer. He works for Ecotope. He is arguably our nation's leading engineer in central heat pump water heating. He could share that title with a few people, but he's definitely one of the people that gets to have that title. And they've done, I think, 25 central heat pump water heaters on apartment complexes up in the Seattle area, 25 in the last 10 years. So a terrific depth of experience. We're just about to